Welcome to the Super Team Podcast. Akshay, today is a very special episode. I realized all the episodes that I wake up at 6 a.m. for are truly special. Why don't you take it away? Tell us who we're talking to today.
Welcome, Amjad, the CEO and founder of Replit, and of course, one of Replit's earliest investors and crypto and tech's most prolific angel investors, Balaji Srinivasan. I'm going to stop at that and have you actually both introduce each other because I know you know each other and would like to hear the most personal and flattering introduction of the other person. Maybe we can start with you, Amjad.
So Balaji is a graduate from Stanford. He did computer science and biotech or something related to biology. He then started a biotech company and then sold that for a few $100 million in like maybe early 2010s. He can correct me on the dates.
Late 2010s, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And he was also a partner at A16Z. And he crypto-pilled A16Z. As we know, A16Z is like the largest crypto fund right now, but that was like really thanks to Balaji.
I won't take all the credit for that. I think Dixon and I mean, certainly Dixon is running the crypto fund and so on, but I think it's fair to say I was influential on the thinking. And so I'm certainly not going to take all the credit for everything. I think I helped on crypto and bio at A16Z. I think that is true. I think that's fair.
And then people do not know this, but also Balaji taught a course at Stanford about startup engineering, which is a very influential course about how to start a business and how to code at the same time, which actually was a huge inspiration for us at Replit. Balaji started a company called 21, also a huge inspiration to us at Replit, but basically 21 was trying to create an SDK for Bitcoin so that Bitcoin can be integrated into any platform. And they popularized this concept of grid computing. And the idea is that you go from a world of building stacks of software to building software in a networked fashion where you compose software by integrating different services, and every service publishes how much it takes to call a function on that service. You can annotate a function on a service with how many sats it takes to call it. So it really changes the programming methodology from you build a piece of software and then you put it on AWS and then you figure out how to monetize it using Stripe into monetization really built into software. And this is what gets me excited about the vision of crypto, and we can get into what we're doing there, but this is also a huge inspiration for us. That turned into Earn, and Earn got acquired by Coinbase, which became their sort of Earn platform where you can learn and earn crypto. And Balaji became the CTO in a time that was very monumental, just pre-IPO for Coinbase. And since then, he's been an investor, thinker, philosopher. He wrote the book The Network State, and it's I'm sure we'll get into some aspects of the network state, so I'll let Balaji sort of introduce that part, but yeah, is that a good introduction?
First of all, that's extremely kind, and I appreciate all that. It's interesting to see things that I haven't thought about in a little while. For example, the distinction between cloud versus grid computing. Just to touch on that for a second, the grid computing is this concept from the 90s that I think, Mark Anderson's concept of everything that was proposed in the 90s will eventually work. Grid computing will eventually work. And the difference between the grid and the cloud, it took me a while to articulate, but a grid computer, an ideal one, is one which is not a cloud computer because it's got some aspect to it. For example, it's like a camera on a windowsill, or it's a drone. Those are out in the world. And renting them is something you can't just, if you rented a camera in an AWS data center, it would be pointed at, the inside of a data center. It's not interesting. But the fact that that computer is controlling a camera on a windowsill in, let's say, New York is more interesting. That's one model of grid computing. Another model is bidirectional, where with the cloud, it's unidirectional. You have, payment going up and you have compute going down, but the grid is bidirectional, where computers that slack capacity is being used and compute is being run. Folding at home is a great example of a grid computing application, right? Where individual computers, their slack capacity is being used, which is not otherwise being used. I do think actually we can revisit all that stuff now, 7-8 years later. With 21, by the way, the thing about that is that was actually a very difficult turnaround project, and grid was just one of several things we tried, and then eventually tasking worked. And so we sold to Coinbase. And it was actually, I wrote about that on Medium.
And actually, the tasking and Replit bounties have a lot in common, and there might be like a worthy successor to the tasking and earn.com vision. And so we definitely want to talk about that. By the way, for folks watching, you should know that they didn't have any idea that they were going to introduce each other, and that's the best. Otherwise, we would read bios, and everyone's heard the bios. A personal introduction of what you remember is actually more valuable. With that, Balaji, I'm going to have you please introduce Amjad on the podcast.
Sure. So Amjad grew up in Palestine, and he came out to the US and was an engineer at Facebook, and an exceptional engineer there. He kind of got into YC and was at Startup School 2013, if I'm not mistaken, right? You were there in person, right?
Yep.
Which is a great class. Class 2013 also included Austin Allred of Lambda School, and Ryan Peterson of Flexport, and a few other really legit founders who've also become friends of mine. Over the years, I mean, the thing is, one of the things I've thought about for many years that Amjad and I both share an interest in is the so-called dark talent, like the dark matter, that's in the galaxy that you can't see through a telescope, right? The dark talent is all this talent around the world. You may not Amjad may not have used that term for it, but it's all this talent around the world that's finally surfaced with the internet. Like, not just genius programmers, but certainly genius programmers in Palestine. Or, for example, there's this article from 10 years ago called The Boy Genius of Ulaanbaatar, like this kid in Mongolia who just crushed everybody in this Coursera class out of middle of nowhere, who would never have had the money to go to MIT or be discovered there, maybe spoke English with an accent, but he's super legit. All of that dark talent is something I've been very interested in because it's underpriced relative to where it should be, right? Those people should rise, and we should help them rise. That's actually what, like the internet means to me. It's like global equality of opportunity. For many years, what I've actually wanted to do is like an online university, which has crypto bounties to people to educate them and so on. And so then when Amjad was doing Replit, I was like, well, I really want to seed invest in this. There's only so many things I can do at the same time. And I love what they're doing because they've executed it so well. And now he's executed it so phenomenally well. It's easy to, there's several projects that are kind of like this. First of all, doing an online, most people who are watching this know what Replit is, but if you haven't used Replit, you should. It is not just an online code editor, which is what it started as, an online execution environment, but it's really a way to, basically share applications with other people, quickly develop something. You don't have to worry about setting up your dev environment in the same way. It just kind of does it for you. And now it's got this new AI thing called Replit Ghostwriter that writes some of your code for you. And it's just like improved a lot over the years, and it's now just absolutely flying. It's an amazing service. It's really, as big as GitHub was, I think Replit will be even bigger. There's a lot of folks, by the way, who tried to do things like what Replit is over the years. And that's why it's hard to do what Amjad and team have done. Like one of the reasons is whenever you're running somebody else's code and you've got curious programmers, they will try to break out of your sandbox and hack your system in 500 different ways. So simply the security problem is actually a non-trivial thing, right? Am I wrong, Amjad?
Absolutely.
Right?
No, that's what,
and supporting the number of different languages that they support and making sure that people can write non-trivial bits of code and yet not break out of the sandbox and screw up the entire system is itself just right there, table stakes, a fairly non-trivial problem to solve. And then all the deployment stuff and they're using Nix, which is like this kind of a pain in the ass thing to learn, but it's actually useful. I won't get too technical on this podcast, but would you agree with that? Like the state,
Wow, that was a jive at us. I won't get too technical on this podcast.
Sorry.
I heard that.
Yeah. The two Indians in tech who did not go to engineering school.
Who did not go to engineering school are running this podcast, yes.
Are running this podcast. So go ahead. But they're amazing at other things, by the way, I want to say. They're very good
the
comedians.
Consolation prize.
They're very good comedians. They're very good operators. They're amazing at many other things. Not everybody has to be an engineer. I do agree with that.
All right. So Amjad, then with that, I'm going to ask you about something you wrote in about 8 years ago, 2015 master plan. And you said growth by building tools for signing up teachers and students, build a simple network and AI assisted interface that blurs the distinction between learning and building, evolve into a platform where people come to learn, build, explore, and host applications. How close have you stuck to the flight plan?
It is sort of 100% true. Like it's pretty freaking amazing that humans have this capacity to to plan many years in the future. But yeah, that's exactly what happened. We ended up building, like our go-to-market was education, because, one of the things about engineers is that they tend to be somewhat dogmatic about their tools. And so they, like, a lot of people were actually a little skeptical, and the technology was not ready, right? Like, and it's still we're still improving. I think this year will be a monumental year for us, where the platform is going to be sort of production ready. But technology is pretty difficult. And so you sort of don't want to go in a cave for like 10 years and like build something and then come out with it. You want to grow, you want to be out in the market, you want to build a name and all of that. And so we thought that education is going to be a great go-to-market, and turned out to be a great go-to-market. One thing about education is that the viral coefficient of a teacher is pretty high. Like, you sign up one teacher, they bring in 20 students. And by the way, the students, they build an application, they bring in their family. And they, like, the way Replit spread is sort of like teacher to student, student to like father who works in technology, or CTO to employees. It's sort of the network was filling up in a sort of like a very unique way. And then on the second point, what I mean by a network assisted interface is that because it's in the cloud, you're sort of powered by a network of packages and open source and so, sort of features and platforms. And when you put something in the cloud, it becomes this like this networked application as opposed to this standalone local application. And the AI assisted part, I mean, everyone's talking about that now, but I predicted like something like Copilot back then, and I actually started prototyping it. It literally said like language models will enable more efficiencies for engineers. And now we have something called Ghostwriter, which is basically AI assisted programming. Blurring the distinction between learning and building is absolutely what happens on Replit. Like, people come and they come to learn. They do 100 days of code or something like that, which we have in Hindi, by the way, just recently. And slowly, like, we sort of trick you into building. Like, you think you're learning, but you're actually building an application. And then you can like share that application out to the world. And finally, the evolution of the platform to be more of a hosting production ready platform. I would say this year, right? This is the year where Replit becomes enterprise ready, production ready. I mean, people are already hosting workloads on it that are, production and commercial workloads. But I think the readiness of the platform is going to happen this year. So we're in the third part of the master plan.
Amjad, you recently launched Bounties as well. How is that product doing? Someone described it as Uber for brains. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We talked about the inspiration behind Bounties being earn.com's tasks, but also Balaji did this experiment with 1729. Balaji, do you want to give an intro on 1729 and then I'll go into Bounties?
Sure, yeah. So this is something which, I've wanted to do for a long time and kind of prototyped and whatnot. Here's the short version and then the long version. Short version is we did an experiment where we had a blog post and an associated set of tasks where people essentially did programming projects, and Replit could see that prompt of the blog post got back, plus some money, got back programming that people did on Replit. And that actually seemed like a good way of getting people to use Replit and to get paid to use Replit and so on. That general concept, by the way, of tasks that are paid in cryptocurrency. Why is the cryptocurrency part important? Because this is something that people take for granted, but it's actually really important. You can send and receive cryptocurrency if you have an internet connection. That is simply not true for any other kind of payment on the internet. For example, here's one way I can prove that to somebody who's skeptical. How many times have you put a credit card into a form on the internet?
Many times.
Many times. Okay. So to pay in. Now, how many times have you put your bank account into a form on the internet to get paid out?
Few times.
Very few, right? In fact, you can probably count it on one hand. It's like PayPal, a few other very high trust sites.
Yeah.
One of the reasons, especially in the US, in India may be different, but especially in the US, like your bank account number is more like your password because somebody who knows it can debit from things and so on and so forth. So you don't want to share it willy-nilly. Your credit card number is as well, but there's like a little more security arguably around it. But the point being that shows that there is an enormous barrier to doing payouts on the internet. And just pay-ins, right? If you recall, like PayPal preceded Stripe, and the improvement that Stripe was over PayPal, at the time that Stripe came out, by the way, in the early 2010s, late 2000s, people were like, wait a second, PayPal already does this, except obviously I paid for credit things on the internet with credit cards. But it was a pain. It was like a whole engineering project to do that. Everybody had to do it from scratch. Stripe made it easier. And making something really important easier was worth $100 billion. Of course, Stripe did way more than just Stripe Checkout. They did a bunch of other things and they did them extremely well and they executed extremely well. But the point is that the opportunity on pay-ins, their flagship product that's still an important product for them, was a massive opportunity that was a gateway into other products. So now one of my theses is that the opportunity on payout is probably comparable, because payout doesn't really even have something as good as PayPal. What is your solution for payout on the internet? And if you can solve that, well, guess what? Even 10 years ago, one of the things with Bitcoin is like, Bitcoin will allow instant jobs. Okay. Meaning you can just come to a website, click button, start making money. Now, there's actually other things you need for that as well. I think you need crypto credentials. So you don't just come to a website, you prove that you've got some skill and then you start making money. But even if you come to a website and you're a human being and you can prove you're human, you could start completing like machine learning type tasks, like scale.ai type tasks, right? Just this entire idea of crypto tasking is a huge, huge, huge area that I think it's not like a business or even a vertical. It's as big as like advertising or like online ads. It will be $1 trillion like
we
sector.
have an internal joke that's like the earning is $1 trillion niche.
Yeah, exactly. Right? That's right. Crypto earning in particular, like doing tasks on the internet to earn internet currency from anyone to anyone. Just the fact that you've fully connected the graph, right? The internet economy is actually the biggest market in the world. People haven't fully realized this. They still think, the biggest economy in the world used to be the United States because it had the same legal system and it had kind of a common culture and a common currency. And so people would launch America first, right? And then arguably China is also a massive market, which has, if you can get legal in China, you can ship to 1 billion Chinese and so on and so forth, right? And those are the two largest integrated markets in the world where lots of provinces, lots of people have all been hammered down into like one uniform deployment point for a product. But the internet is now emerging as actually the world's truly largest market with a truly common standard because it's got contracts now with smart contracts. It's got currency with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. It's got culture with, these, with obviously with social networks, but with the cross-pollination. And you can argue this point because like the Chinese internet is air gapped off from the global English internet. But I think it is snapping into view, especially as the American economy is kind of in some ways trying to wall itself off from the world and kind of retreat. This is still expanding. The internet part is still expanding. And so what I look at Replit is doing is a very important vertical. That's one of the first verticals that makes crypto tasks. I mean, I think the very, very first vertical was crypto tasks for crypto stuff, right? Which is like not just earn.com, but Coinbase Earn, where you would like learn about a crypto project and earn crypto. So it's very meta. It's like crypto people earning crypto for doing crypto things on a crypto site, like this loop, right? But the second adjacent thing that sort of crosses the chasm is people earning crypto, or specifically Bitcoin, which is the best known cryptocurrency and the most valued one worldwide in terms of name recognition for sure. Earning Bitcoin for doing code, that is adjacent, right? So that crosses the chasm. Earning Bitcoin for completing code shows one multi-billion dollar market. And then itself, I think, will enable other markets as people are like, okay, Replit bounties, but for X or for Y or for Z, for many other kinds of verticals. Let me pause there.
Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, it's that's basically sort of the roots of it. And one way to look at it, there's this like very well-known economist. He wrote this thing called the theory of the firm. So Coase talks about essentially like the main insight from Coase is that full-time employment is a bug, right? It's like the fact that you need to get a job, to get a full-time job is sort of a bug in the economy because the transaction cost for getting work done is high. So transaction cost is basically, transaction friction essentially. So anytime you change the transaction friction, it changes the equation for how people do business. Uber brings down the transaction cost to near zero. Like the friction is super low, right? It changed the taxi industry, it changed how people move, it changed how people live. I know people who, stopped owning a car and lived in a different way because they can now depend on Uber. So like these things really change markets and economies, right? And employment is one of those things where the transaction is pretty high. Transaction cost is pretty high. So I think a combination of the internet, payment infrastructure broadly, whether it's crypto or Stripe or PayPal, what have you, an environment like Replit where you can do your work, where you can share a reproducible project powered by Nix, allows for a new type of software market. And this is really what we're going after with Bounty, is that this idea of fluid work. Like we see people getting work done in 30 minutes. Someone posted a Figma file the other day. It's like, I want a landing page. 30 minutes later, they had a React project done. 30 minutes. That's crazy. That's really unheard of, right? And so we want to get to a world where, what, Balaji opened with is the dark talent or the talent that otherwise, and this ties into our discussion in India, is that people want to be able to make money from programming. If you want a lot more people to learn coding, the ability to earn from coding needs to be predictable and needs to happen pretty quickly. The idea that, most people learn how to code when they're teenagers and they earn their first dollars in their mid-20s, that's kind of absurd. Like, why is there like an 8-year lag in those cases? Balaji put up a bounty to generate New York Times style articles from tweets. The person who did it in like probably 24 hours was a guy that learned how to code on Replit. They were on day 85 of 100 days of Python, and they were able to build and earn this thing, earn $1,800 from building this thing. They went viral. They were mentioned on the Joe Rogan podcast. Imagine. By the way, a day of code is 20 minutes. So 85 times 20, I don't know what that is, but that's probably that's crazy, right? Like that's like really a different world. And that's what we're trying to build here. We think that there's a lot of legacy stuff and sort of how we work and the kind of flexibility that we have and the ability to just get things done quickly. Like in the IDE, I should be able to highlight IDE as the programming interface. I should be able to highlight a piece of code, right click, add bounty. Like, I don't want to refactor this. It's kind of low level work that I can like send to someone else, right? And so integrating a labor marketplace right into your programming environment, I think is a game changer. It allows entrepreneurs to be able to extend their teams elastically. Like the cloud, the main idea behind the cloud is that you can get elastic compute. When you have high demand, you can like expand your compute. When you have low demand, you can scale down to zero. So Bounties is sort of, think about it as an extension of your team, and you can expand your team and then collapse it over time. And we want to add different modalities. By the way, important to remember, Bounties has been out only for 12, 13 weeks. You asked how it's doing. It's doing super well. It's like we're catching up. Like it's like the product is MVP quality, to be honest.
Do you track how much people have made in total in that period?
Yeah. $30,000 people have made. And by the way, most of these people live in low cost areas like India or their kids. People are making some serious dollars on there. And we're hearing that some people are migrating from platforms like HackerOne and things like that. They're saying that Replit, you can make a lot more money.
Do you guys think there's like a ceiling of the kind of work you can do through bounties, or do you think that's elastic as well? Like you can do a lot more.
Yeah, so I think it's the transaction cost, right? So getting someone into your code base, if you have a big legacy code base, that's pretty hard. That's a pretty big transaction cost. can you reduce the transaction friction down to a place where a bounties type work could be possible? I think you can. And the answer is AI, right? So imagine if you, bring someone into your code base to do a piece of work, and they can chat with a GPT like system and ask it questions about the code. What is this project? How, what is the history of this project? What are the core abstractions? What are the classes? What am I required to do? And I think if you have a system like that in place, I think you'll be able to, there's no limit on like the kind of projects that could be done. We just prototyped this thing where you get a bounty as a bounty hunter, and you can click generate project, and it takes the project description and runs it through an AI system and generates the skeleton of the project. And we're hearing from people that are trialing this that it saves them up to 50% of work. So I think we're at the sort of precipice of this enabling technologies that allows us to build this fluid marketplace. And I think that a lot of these problems are going to be solved. Again, there's a big tie-in to crypto here. Like, the concept of staking in crypto is very interesting. The way the current marketplace on Replit works, and again, that's the V1, is that you create a bounty and a bunch of people apply to it. We're creating another modality where it's a contest, where like you create a bounty, a bunch of people can submit the codes, and this is the 1729 model, right? But we think there's another modality, for example, staking. Like you create a bounty, and I can like stake. Like I can say, I'm going to put $100. I'm going to say I'm going to complete it in 24 hours. And if I don't complete it, you can slash my funds, right? And so there's a lot of crypto-like dynamics you can sort of build into the system like this.
So this is maybe my dumb brain, okay? But as AI gets better, isn't AI also Uber for brains? Like,
Yes.
As AI keeps getting better, wouldn't that be eating into the bounties? Am I making any sense?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, but if you look at the history of AI and automation, every time the AI takes a menial type of work from us, humans tend to expand into more creative type of work.
Okay.
So it's never really. Let me put it this way: technology almost entirely always create new jobs and more jobs. And so there's like momentary disruption. I think there are some engineers that are sort of are a little bit at risk of being totally automated away. The kind of engineer that's like mostly doing glue code really needs to think about their life choices. You either become, I think, so I've said this before on a different podcast, but I think there's a bimodal distribution we're going to see in engineering with the effect of AI. I think the low-level programmer, the John Carmacks of the world, those people will continue to be relevant.
But you might want to explain what low-level means here, because most people would think low-level means, very junior programmer, but right. you mean low-level in the sense of systems programmer, right?
Yes.
And John Carmack is obviously one of the greatest systems programmers of all time. I just caught that because, like, somebody might come in without context and not know.
Yeah, no, that's true.
See, thank God, this is why we have Balaji on this.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I completely understand why Amjad said it that way, but I was also thinking how somebody without context might misunderstand it.
So low level meaning like close to the metal, like close to the hardware, someone who's actually building novel systems and writing code that's never been written before. And those people will continue to be relevant. They'll become even more relevant. I think the product engineer, the kind of entrepreneurial, someone who's really well-rounded, generalist, can do UX, UI, design, can do all that stuff. It's going to be supercharged by AI, and their job is sort of secure. I think the middle end part, the kind of engineer that's sort of like gluing things together, I think that job is probably at risk. I don't know. What do you think, Balaji? Do you think that's like an accurate assessment?
I think that, do you know Soros has this concept of reflexivity?
Yeah.
So I think that we are now budgeting for the AI revolution, but we are not budgeting for the AI counter revolution. And the AI counter revolution will be, it's already kind of gaining steam, but it's every mid-level mediocre programmer, mediocre writer, mediocre artist, mediocre lawyer using every single tool in their toolbox, including lawsuits, strikes, who the heck knows, certainly voting, politicians, demagoguery, swarming, crazy things to stop AI from competing with them. And I think this is actually why people who are like, oh, AI is going to win, obviously. And I'm like, I think we're in like the Napster era, but we haven't yet seen the RIA. I mean, we're just seeing it. We're seeing like the lawsuits against Stable Diffusion and so on. I think it's going to get extremely wild and extremely messy. And it may turn out that there's actually 3 sectors of AI, which are the sort of controlled, legal, constrained, regulated American or Western sector, the similarly controlled and constrained Chinese sector, where they'll clone everything American, but then they'll also apply the same techniques on WeChat's gigantic database of trillions and trillions of posts, which are all in a common format. So they'll get their Chinese version of an LLM and everything else, right? Chinese Stable Diffusion, Chinese this, Chinese that. And the Chinese government will just seize whatever data is needed, right? And then if we're lucky, we get the third version, which is the free AI, the truly decentralized one, which may be like, the culture of BitTorrent or the culture of Bitcoin, the culture of the Pirate Bay, the culture of Sci-Hub, where all of the MP3s and all of that public music files, public Hollywood files, files from scientific papers, all that type of stuff, what Aaron Swartz was doing in terms of liberating all this information, it gets liberated and then people train on it in the decentralized world. And that's where you get the things that compete with Hollywood and compete with Motown or I guess the music industry, that free all the information that's locked in scientific papers, that have non-woke and non-CCP programmable AIs, right? And maybe you have a DAO that gets large enough that it can, and the costs drop enough that you can start crypto crowdfunding a community AI that reflects your community's values. And I think that's actually where things may go when the counter revolution hits, both in the West and in China. That's actually, I should probably tweet that. Give me your thoughts on that.
I just have a question, which is that why do you think we'd have like a controlled version of the technology? Because I understand with crypto, because there's like the sense of an anti-state or a revolution against the state, but with AI, why would there be that?
Oh my God. Well, where do I start? Okay. Well, first of all, Google like Anna Eshoo, ESHOO, Anna Eshoo AI letter. Just even 4 months ago, Eshoo urges NSA, OSTP to address unsafe AI practices, right? Oh my God, Stable Diffusion is out there. This is completely unsafe, blah, 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 right? Look at this stuff, okay? Then even a while ago, the EU, for example, was saying, hey, we know that we're not going to be able to compete with the US and China on AI innovation. You know how they're going to compete?
I think
AI regulation. There you go.
Regulation,
Right. So, as you probably know, in the US, there's these idiot people who are like, oh my God, math is white supremacy or something like that, which is both. It's like stupid on like so many levels. It's almost impossible to parse, as all of us non-white people who must pray, oh my God, white people, please do the math problem for us. Obviously I have nothing against white people. I think it's so stupid that everything is so racialized. But basically if you look at any engineering department in the USA or any engineering staff, did Elon's H-1B army, or let's say whether it's H-1B or not, did the army of people in Elon's conference room, did that look like, quote, white supremacy? I don't think so, right? So the wokes have this moronic thing about math is white supremacy. But as I tweeted, not to be outdone, Europe seeks to regulate AI by regulating logic itself. Okay, so they have this definition, which is like this is years ago, by the way, before this is like 2 years ago, before like the modern ChatGPT or whatever went super viral. For the purpose of this regulation, the following definitions apply. AI system means software that is developed with one or more of the techniques and approaches listed in Annex 1. Annex 1, logic and knowledge-based approaches. Okay, and the thing about this is you can draw a straight line back from, large scale LLMs to, neural networks to like perceptrons and XOR or whatever, perceptron one layer can't do it, but point is you can draw a layer, a line back, right? Similarly, you can draw a line back from AlphaGo to any algorithm, right? And where do you chop it there? Well, at the point that it becomes AI. Okay. So EU wants to go after it. They've been signaling this for a while. This is like what they think of as their big thing, regulating this thing. And a big chunk of blue America, all of these people, the NPCs, will be put out of work by an actual NPC. Do you know that? Do you know what I mean by that? Right? Yeah. All the folks who are just who go to school to mindlessly repeat what is being in the textbook, right? They're going to be put out of work by something that can repeat it way faster and way cheaper. Okay. So what might have to happen is India or other countries come to the mix. And the same way that India, for example, has a different point of view on pharma IP and has a generic drug industry because of that. India may choose to not enforce some of this copyright stuff. And now a lot of the AI is hosted in India. And so India is needed within the Western coalition because they need a bulwark against China. So they can't IP ban all of India. It's also where all the growth is coming out of. They need India too much, right? So India is an important spot where it may turn out that actually a lot of the AI is hosted. So the reason I say this stuff is a certain kind of, in my view, naive person is like, lol, crypto's down. We don't need crypto anymore. We got AI. It's new hotness. I'm like, AI is like have you seen those movies where there's like a gun skittering on the floor and then everybody's diving for the gun?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? That is what AI is. It is a technology that is not yet under political control. And it is an immensely politically important technology. And AI itself has no political theory of who should wield it embedded in it. They have this hacked, stupid thing on top of it, which says every time you type in a thing of a man on the moon, it'll just paste in black, Asian, woman, etc. on the moon, literally paste in those words on it. So then you basically get the prompt. Just go ahead.
Black Asian woman on the moon.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's like the stupidest paint by numbers, woke American view of diversity. The thing is, if you were actually, let's say you're actually, of African descent, you'd want like Nigerian or individual Nigerian ethnicities reflected there with their own, cultural things, or East Africans. You would have a much more fine-grained thing than like Asian, black, this and that, these like extreme, broad brush kinds of things, right? You'd want your culture actually represented. That's, by the way, one of the big moral arguments against the stupid woke AI, which is it actually justifies centralization of power. It's just so convenient. AI is so dangerous. We must centralize power, and we'll give this stupid window dressing of black Asian woman on the moon or whatever. But it's so powerful that we won't actually allow the black people, the Asian people, and the women to have access to the private keys to actually run their own AI. Right? That's a magic trick, right? The centralization is implicit discrimination.
Yeah. So it sounds like, Balaji, like, there's the tailwind of, so I think there's two tailwinds to something like Bounties, and then want to get into a bit more about Replit's plans for India, especially.
Sure.
I think there might be announcents here. But the one is a political headwind.
You can cut all that stuff if you want, but that's actually
no. It's great. Yeah. This is great. No, we're gonna keep. So one tailwind is markets are expanding to the internet from just the America, and that creates opportunities for folks living in India. Now, Super Team is in India, Turkey, Vietnam, Germany as well, and that creates global opportunities for them. And then you have the headwind of, I guess, the domestic politics. That means that there's all these American conceptions of diversity and things like this that make it so that it's hard for tech companies to, just operate within San Francisco, and they actually may do much better if they moved to recruit global talent without actually moving them to San Francisco. So that's sort of like the political headwind.
I mean, California itself will do some stupid AI regulation for sure. So you'll have like overlocking layers of like California and the US and the EU and so on and so forth. Go ahead, finish what you're saying.
Yeah. So which brings us to sort of like whether Replit has any specific plans for India itself. Any announcements you want to make, Amjad, that are exclusive to our podcast would be greatly welcome.
So India is a very important market for us. Just to kind of do a bit of a preamble, it is the largest, second largest developer base for us outside the US. Even outside of Replit, India is quickly becoming the largest base of developers. Full stop. It's now producing the most amount of developers. I think in the next couple of years, it's going to be the most amount of developers in the world in India. Just to give you a bit of a stat, we've been growing 25% week over week over the past few months in India, which is kind of wild, right? It's the largest mobile user base. So a lot of we developed the first ever mobile IDE. So people don't think about coding on the mobile, but actually it is a thing, and our mobile app is adopted heavily in India. We have 50,000 people a week coding on their phones in India. And that's growing really fast. One of our most followed users is from India. Code with Harry is a coding influencer from India.
So what's the playbook? You get on Replit, learn how to code, then you ship some stuff, you build a following, and that allows, is the monetization loop complete there?
Yeah, I mean, you could do bounties, you could earn tips, and we're actually building a way to put a paywall for software. So sort of think Stripe, right, built into Replit. You'll be able to do the entire monetization loop. Like you go in, you learn how to code, you can sell your services and bounties and make serious money, or you can invent a piece of software that you can monetize, and that's a more scalable way of making money. Or you could be a creator and earn tips, right? So like we think that Replit is the first creator economy for software. Like the fact, there's a creator economy for every type of media, but not software. So we think the software is going to follow suit. Yesterday, I saw there was a story about a 6-year-old kid in India who became a Microsoft certified AI developer. 6-year-old kid, and basically someone on the team looked at that and it was like, oh, like, are they on Replit? And turns out they are on Replit. They have 200 followers on Replit. They have a lot of viral apps and games on Replit, and they're building things on Replit. And so it's pretty amazing sort of tie into our previous conversation about discovering talent. Especially now that I have kids, I have a 3-year-old kid. Just the idea of a 6-year-old creating things on Replit and potentially making money is kind of a wild idea. Data centers has been US centric. For the first time, we're spinning up a new data center. So that new data center is going to be in Mumbai. It's going to be dedicated server cluster for India, which means much faster load times, much more responsive code completions. We're going to put AI services as well there. We're going to have GPUs. We're going to support people with their learning journey. And speaking of learning, maybe I hinted at that earlier, but the most popular coding teacher in India just launched 100 days of code in Hindi on Replit. So you can go from like zero experience in coding and go all the way to someone who can earn money, who can do work for Balaji online, right? So that's 100 days of code in Hindi, and we're super excited about that. A few things on the roadmap. So we're enabling UPI. So the UPI is the India payment stack. It's a pretty advanced one. So we're going to enable that for in-app payments. We're going to launch even more coding tutorials. We're working with a lot of different influencers. We're going to do more India-specific community events. We did our first meetup in Bangalore last year, which was a huge hit. We're gonna be doing partnerships with dev tools companies in India, and we think Replit is going to be good for India because in India there's actually a shortage of computer science teachers. There's a lot more demand of people wanting to learn computer science, but a lot of people go to school and they find that the teachers are not great. There's also a problem centralized curriculum in India, and so the curriculum might actually be a little outdated, and so it's not teaching you the state of the art, and we want people to learn the state of the art. And finally, obviously, like we want people to earn really early on in life, so we think that's going to be also a game changer.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on the launch, and sort of setting up a server in India is like a big deal. I think that setting up physical infrastructure in any country is like really putting your roots down there. So congratulations, and we wish you the best. I think on the bounties itself, I have sort of like a personal request, because we have within the super team community folks earning. So we have distributed through various sponsors who have sponsored bounties about $1.2 million over the last 14 months through the Earn product. And it's a free open source tool. There's no take rate. It's like a public good. But it'd be awesome to see Replit incorporate not just UPI for domestic payments, but USDC for global payments.
Absolutely.
Balaji may have some thoughts on this as well. So would love to hear if you have views on crypto and just attracting an already global mobile workforce that earns in a bounty style environment.
Yeah, I mean, we want to do crypto payouts. That's pretty obvious for us. A lot of people don't have bank accounts. A lot of people want to stay anonymous, and I think we can do up to 10K before KYC kicks in. So like people can earn $10,000 without even showing themselves to the world. And so we want to, again, we're big fans of everything Balaji says, and so one of his ideas is the pseudonymous economy, and Replit is pseudonymous. Like most of the users, I don't know them by name, I know them by handle. And so we want to enable crypto payments for that. So our ideas around crypto on Replit is that we want to be, I think some people call it a hub and spoke model, right? Like where, Replit is sort of centralized, it has its own centralized sort of currency and everything. But coming in and out of the system, crypto is going to be much more efficient than any other fiat currency in that regard. We're looking at ways to use like Lightning Network, the Bitcoin Lightning Network, to make like Replit the best way to program sort of decentralized Bitcoin applications. We have a lot of plans and sort of crypto land. I mean, Replit is being used to program a lot of different sort of crypto applications, and so we're excited about that.
Amjad, you got recently dunked on by Taleb, who confused you for being a crypto maximalist.
Taleb is like obviously like a smart guy that had like some really good insights in the late 90s, early 2000s. He's like just become very grumpy, and it's been very sad to watch his deterioration into just like this very curmudgeon sort of online figure. And so I don't really pay that much attention to him, but for some reason, like he compared me to SBF. I don't know why. And I told him I had like literally nothing to do with SBF or even like, primarily crypto. So, and I challenged him to a deadlift because he talks a lot about deadlifting. And he just talks a lot of shit and he never shows anything. Like he keeps talking about his investment strategy. He never shared his returns. Probably he's been losing money all the time. He talks about deadlifting. We've never seen him deadlift. So, I'll say it here on the podcast. So Taleb, if you're, serious about your threats, I'm happy to fly anywhere in the world to come deadlift with you. And the winner, let's like put some money on it. That's like $100,000 for who deadlifts more. So
we'll host a physical location in Bangalore in India, in Tanmay's house, with a small audience.
The thing is that, by the way, like a dunk, it's not, when you say A dunked on B, that assumes the dunk was successful, right? Fair. Like presumed, right? Attack or yelled at, old man yells at cloud is kind of, in my view, more appropriate, right? Amjad's witty defense, I think, was also good. I mean, anyway, whatever. I have nothing to add to what Amjad said other than you should show Amjad's tweet.
Should developers also know how to market their work? And as part of that, should they be on Twitter, or is Twitter a distraction?
I think, like I said before, like the, with regards to how AI is going to benefit programmers, I think the entrepreneur generalist is really the big beneficiary here. Like the entrepreneur generalist is going to be so super powered. I don't know if you guys probably read The Sovereign Individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it is one of the sort of Balaji canon or crypto canon, but basically like this idea of this individual that is like as powerful as nation states in some cases, right? And being able to like generate a lot of money, create a lot of businesses, like do a lot of really cool things is I think is coming to reality. And as part of it, you need to be this like super generalist. You need to be able to market your work, sell your work. You need to be able to generate media, generate art. You need to be able to be witty, be funny, be able to talk, about the current state of the world, and be observant and be able to kind of engage in various discussions. And so I think the world will really benefit the well-rounded individual. And I think again, this is what goes into like what I said with bimodal distribution. Like there's the normal distribution. Like think about inverting the normal distribution, right? And so I think the world is going to get to a place where extreme specialization and extreme generalization is the way to go. Like, so you're either like the best in the world at like writing Linux kernels, or you're like the best at the world at like, generating business ideas and like building them. Right. And I think like the middle will sort of disappear a little bit.
It's interesting because I think to that point, Amjad, I think it's also possible to be pretty good at a few things, and that synthesis isn't yet done by the computer. That is still a model. I'm not sure how long it'll be one. It's interesting because, in a sense, the presumption is there'll always be some higher ground that you can go to when, quote, AI disrupts your business or when tech disrupts your thing. And, in a sense, it's funny that people who do digital art and they're using Photoshop and they're using all these tools that ancient artists would have killed for are like, oh my God, I can't believe you're using computers to do art. Because, part of it was in the craftsmanship, the fact that you can copy paste and do the stuff that ancient artists couldn't do, is a cheat code. But now they don't like the new cheat codes that are being introduced. It may turn out, what's funny is right now, this is something others have observed. Altman has talked about this. Many people have now talked about this, but he observed fairly early that the disruption is digital first and physical last, as opposed to what people thought. They thought it was going to be truck drivers or unskilled labor that was going to be gone after by robots, but it's actually starting on the blue checks rather than the blue collars. So maybe a bunch of blue checks will need to actually go and work with their hands. That's possible.
Why is that making you so happy?
Why is that making me happy? Well, because it does make them deal. So here's the thing. I've seen a lot of socialist professors, and there's actually something very similar between the socialist professor and the capitalist CEO. And you know what that is?
They both don't do work with their hands.
Well, I was going to come back to that. They both deeply feel that they should be in charge.
Okay.
Okay. The socialist professor does so through the mechanism of the state. They advise the state to regulate this and tax this and seize that and subsidize that and invade this, right? But they feel that they're smarter, they should be in charge, and they should tell the state what to do, and these people should get out of the way. The moment you give that person some responsibility and you actually put them in charge of a P&L, and now they actually have more power over less things and far more upside over a smaller budget, right? It completely changes their mentality. I've seen so many socialists become capitalists. In particular, they realize, oh, wait a second, it's way easier to talk about something than to do it, right? Like, it isn't just the idea, it's the execution. Now, that doesn't mean ideas aren't valuable, but it does mean that in the academic theory-ish kind of way, sometimes you do have an initial theoretical breakthrough that you then couldn't, quote, just implement. But often the implementation itself requires a lot of breakthroughs. And they realize how, even, for example, how many times have you drank a glass of milk or gallon of milk, whatever? You bought a gallon of milk, right?
Yeah.
Okay. How many times have you sold a gallon of milk?
Like never.
Never, because you need to get a farm and a cow and a pasteurization license and all this stuff. You need to brand it. You need to do the distribution deal to get the gallon of milk there. Like the level to which every product you buy is like this incredible world champion, ultra competitor. You don't understand it until you're actually trying to build something that is a competitive product on the market. Anderson has this thing which is like smart people should build things, and it's essentially targeted against those people who have never tried to actually build something and sell it for market. To make $1 of revenue yourself, not to be paid a salary like an academic is paid by the university or a employees paid, but to make $1 of revenue yourself, to build something and sell it, is so difficult to do, and you learn something about the world in doing that your boss doesn't actually have to be quote your boss. You can be the market, right? That is contact with reality that makes people understand reality in a way they simply cannot unless they're actually doing it. In the same way that, for example, everybody who goes to high school or whatever knows whether they're good at basketball. Why? Because they dribbled a basketball and they can see the dribbling looks easy on TV and it's actually really hard when you're doing it. And so they know they suck. And because they know they suck, they're okay that basketball player makes millions and millions of dollars, right? There's a CEO who used to say, I think it's fine that I make as much as a second baseman. That's a different way of positioning the CEO role, right? The difference is that people know that they suck at baseball or cricket, the Indian version, or basketball. They know that they suck. They know that they aren't a model or they're not an artist or they're not a musician, because all those things are cheap in high school. Early on in life, you can figure out how good you are at them. But they don't know that they're not good at business until they've actually tried doing business and realized that being CEO is not just having your feet up on the desk and chomping a cigar and ordering people around. That's what they think it is, because they actually haven't run a business, let alone started one, right? Once they do, they'll realize actually it's way much more than that. It is true, by the way, though, that the very best businesses and the very worst businesses can both operate without the CEO there. You know why?
Why?
Because the worst businesses, obviously, you'd fire that CEO. The best businesses, the CEO has built such a machine that it can operate without their daily input all the time, keeping it going, right? And so it is true that they see a company just working on its own, and they're like, well, the CEO isn't picking up the boxes, and the CEO isn't operating the machinery, and the CEO isn't doing this, CEO isn't that. He's extracting the labor and oppressing these workers, and this is the whole Marx labor theory of value thing, right? And it is true that labor in the 20th century, early 20th century, had the ability to bring a factory to a halt with strikes and so on. But I argue actually that code is doing one thing that is very underappreciated, and it is actually making management tangible. You know why?
I need you to stop asking these questions. It makes me very nervous.
Well, okay. It's because
I'm listening.
Management is becoming automation. It's becoming tangible in the form of code. Like if you've ever set up, like it's one thing to go, just like it's one thing to go and buy a gallon of milk, and it's quite another thing to sell a gallon of milk. It's one thing to say, oh my God, the factory owner isn't doing anything. I'm the one slaving on the assembly line. Have you ever actually set up an assembly line? I have. And I've set up a robotic assembly line, and you learn about cycle times, and you learn about, the refresh rates of individual stations and the queuing theory of how you set them up. It's actually really complicated. It's an engineering problem, very similar in some ways to designing data pipelines, to make sure that a image is, like you have to process it and strip the metadata. And so it's kind of like that. It's f of g of h of x, but with all the physical stuff that comes with that. Okay. And designing an assembly line is way harder, way harder than operating one, especially providing the capital for it. And now, engineers, CEOs, whatever, are designing these assembly lines, and they're doing it in code. And now management is becoming tangible because it's the code, it's the instructions you're giving, and you don't need the human labor anymore necessarily. You might do it with a robot, or you might do it with a script, or you might do it with some combination thereof, right? Toyota has these things, these dark factories that just run independent of the human, okay? So just like that, socialist professor learns what it is to actually build a business when they actually start a business. Just like actually any communist would, if they were actually tasked with building an assembly line and they're tasked with risking their own money to buy the machines didn't come from nowhere, right? They'll be like, oh, actually, I do feel I deserve a reward for this. If I pull this damn thing off, I'm working way harder than these guys who are coming and just pushing a button, right? In the same way, a lot of these blue collars are basically doing nonsense work, that is, it's filling a form or something like that. It's just memorizing something and repeating it that can be automated. And to actually do something that is genuinely difficult, they may, have a different opinion, right? After that, they're like, okay, actually the physical labor is hard or something like that, right? Now, we'll see. It doesn't have to be physical labor. It just has to be something where they're generating actual value. The more entrepreneurial it is, in a sense, right? And that's the thing is I don't actually think, even though it's funny to say it, I don't actually think necessarily being a trucker will make them see things, because they'll just be mad that they're now a trucker. But running a trucking company or even running a Substack, one of the things about Substack, by the way, Substack will be much harder to AI than NYT. You know why?
Substack will be much harder to AI. Oh, got it. Okay.
Using AI as a verb in this sense.
Yeah. Because the thinking is everyone's. It's harder to generate individualism in that sense.
That's right. Exactly. Like the whole thing about being an NPC and, NYT or WAPO or Wall Street Journal, all of these things, basically all those journals are part of like one community. Even if they are employed by different companies, it's one community. And it'd be hard to really tell. Actually, if you did machine learning on it, I think it'd be not that easy to tell the difference between one style of one article and another, because they all sound the same now. They're all the same.
It's like the magic wand tool on Photoshop. Like you can just fill in the rest of the box.
That's right. And actually part of that is due to editors who take the individuality out of any one person's contribution and make it sound in their, stupid way. Right. And then you go to Substack and it's the opposite, where now each one of those guys is an entrepreneur who needs to, compete in the open market. And now there's an incentive for individualism.
That's exactly my point. That's my point. Like the point about like being a sort of a generalist entrepreneur. Like this is really what the AI is gonna bring, and partly it's because it's gonna like there's this concept in computer science called denial of service attack. Basically, like you can bring down a site by just overloading it with requests, and you can use a bunch of bots to do that. So humanity is going to get a denial of service attack in the form of NPC content. And maybe we should define NPC, right? It's like sort of non-player character. It's sort of like when you're playing a video game, that character that is like talking to you and giving you quests and things like that. That's like that NPC. ChatGPT is the ultimate NPC. It doesn't have original thought. It is like this sort of, thing. It's an impressive technology, but at the same time, it's not really producing new knowledge. And so there's actually a lot of people that work in that capacity. As Balaji was talking about, it's like a lot of the mainstream media is NPC. And by the way, some of the people there can actually be good entrepreneurs, good Substackers. And we see a lot of the people deflecting and becoming Substackers, but they're working in an organization that forces them to be NPC-like, because they have to say things that are acceptable in the discourse. Because NPC content is going to get so commodified, people are just tune out. People are just like, it's like, oh, that's GPT, right? Like I'm already tuning out. Like I see a lot of GPT content on my Twitter. Like I had the reply guy there. Yep. I call it the cringe test. It's like sort of a play on
the cringe test, like the cringe test, where it's like,
so good. So it's like if someone is like so cringe in your replies, like go look at their profile. They're probably GPT, because GPT is just cringe NPC, right? And so
that's right. Proof of human is going to become much more valuable. The crypto proof of human,
is both in sort of based individualist thinking. That's like a form of proof of human, right? If you're able to generate original thought, right? And so I think I find this world to be extremely exciting, and because like let's actually show it what it is. Like there's a lot of work out there that is actually not super valuable, and there's a lot of content and there's a lot of thought that is indistinguishable from computer content. And so once this technology goes into mainstream, we're going to see that people are going to be yearning for originality, and it's really going to benefit the nonconformist. And so this is one thing that I really suggest people, if you're someone who's young and just starting out, like try to be based. And but what that means is like try to generate original thought.
Right, those are two different things. Being based is just kind of being normal, right? And like original thought is actually distinct from normal.
Well,
I understand what you're saying.
I don't know if that's the common parlance. But the way I think about base is that
Truth seeking.
you're truth seeking. You're like sort of unmoored by social norms, and you're able to decouple sort of social norms from truth.
Not being an NPC.
Yeah, it is tricky though. I know what you're saying, Amjad, but basically there's sort of two different versions, I think, at least. And the first is just having common sense and being like based upon a solid foundation. That's kind of how I think about it. Whereas woke, you're wild-eyed and awake, and I've seen all the things that they've kept back from me, and so on. I'm aware, I'm woke, right? And red-pilled and woke are actually, in a sense, similar in that you're awake to now new things, right? And of course, people use base as a synonym for red-pilled, but usually based is used just to overanalyze a little bit. That is used as the opposite of woke, where you have some common sense and you don't believe the stupid fad that just came out. You've got like a solid foundation. You're not here and there, current thing, whatever, right? And yet, I would argue that is sort of an innate conservatism, small c, that is distinct from being an original thinker, which the opposite of woke is not the same as being original. It just means kind of having a common sense head on your shoulders. I would just argue there's two different things. I know what you're saying is basically you're saying don't be woke, be like start from smart premises, but then reason your way to a novel conclusion is, I just draw a distinction there. It's maybe a small thing.
I mean, what I'm really trying to say, Balaji, is that like mid-century, post-war era, and I don't know if that's the case in India, but in most of the world, certainly in the US, but also in Jordan, where I grew up, is that you sort of like, there's an automatic path to life.
Right.
Of course.
Right.
It is like that in India as well.
Yeah. And so that benefit conformity. Like conformity was actually a strategy, right? Like you could do well in life if you're like very conformist and like can do what you're told very well and can just like listen to the popular consensus. Like, I think the world has changed, and I think the world has changed a long time ago. And most like parents are giving it the wrong advice to their kids, especially Middle Eastern and Indian parents, especially like they're like absolutely like really disadvantaging their kids by forcing them to like lose all these years in their lives, like studying for IIT and being so stressed, and instead of like exploring and reading and building and hacking and being a little bit more free spirited, I think. What I'm trying to say is just to try to be nonconformist, even if it feels fake at times. It's probably better than just following the default path.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's no so. The 20th century was the centralized century. And, I've talked about this. There's this article or this Substack post by, it's on Satonier's Substack where he did an interview with me. It's very kindly titled. But one way to think about it, the 20th century was one telephone company and two superpowers and three television stations, one telephone company, AT&T, two superpowers, US and USSR, three TV stations, ABC, CBS, NBC. And it was mass media and mass production area was canalized into one thing, and you're going to work at the same company for 40 years and so on. And you go backwards and forwards in time and you get more and more decentralized. And in the past, people, were like, for example, individual artisan craftsmen or what have you. They weren't as prosperous. That's things people gave up that individuality for the prosperity that mass production allowed in part. And now we might have, quote, the best of both worlds after a huge transitional era where we have some of the prosperity that, automation, mass production, and so on provide, but we're back to individuality again, not without its own costs. And so I agree with Amjad basically on being an original. With that said, there is a trade-off because in theory, if you're a conformist, you just follow the school of fish strategy. You just say whatever the guy next to you is saying, okay? And this way, you can never be singled out because masks don't work, and then they do, right? And you just literally say, you surf the wave of whatever is true at that time. And
you're literally gesturing like a robot for people who are just on the flood.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And it's literally like this. You know how people go and study traffic waves, and it's like actually a wave, and you can write a wave equation for it, And And it's a human phenomenon, but it's like they all want to accelerate as fast as they can, and then they stop, and it's like somewhat predictable. And so you can actually predict what kinds of things cause traffic and so on. It's a longitudinal wave. It's like on one axis, right? Just like you can do two-dimensional waves like ripples in a pond, or three-dimensional like acoustic waves, like, for example, the wave equation for like an earthquake or something, right? Anyway, coming back, so you could do similar kinds of wave equations on social media if we could watch sentiment moving on a social graph. And in fact, if you go to Google Trends and you type in, some of the current thing type things over the last few years, you'll see a massive spike, and then it'll drop off, which is like an aggregation over all the nodes of that wavefront. If all you do is just repeat what the other guy next to you is saying, it's actually not a terrible strategy from a status standpoint, because you can never be singled out. If somebody goes after you for saying, oh, hey, why were you for the current thing at that time? It turned out to be a disaster. You're like, who could have known?
But is it a good earning strategy, Balaji? Like, is it good at all at earning strategy?
So that's the thing. Thank God that differentiating from the masses is higher risk, but also higher reward, right? Like, this is actually why communism was so bad. Among many, many other things it was bad, it removed the upside for deviating from the crowd. In fact, you could get killed for being a capitalist, right? So what you're talking about is being, like, in a sense, an ideological capitalist, right? Having a different but good idea and then advocating it. Now, the tricky part about this is if you've got a society that's mostly working, then a novel idea that's novel for the sake of it, like, do you know what atonal music is?
No.
It's, if you listen to it, it's horrible. Okay. But it was an innovation, and it was popularized. And why was it popularized is because all these guys didn't want to simply continue the tradition of classical music. They wanted to do something new. They wanted to put their mark on the world. They wanted to be different, but they were different in a bad way. It's possible to be different in a bad way. In fact, it is because so many people have become different in a bad way, and that bad way has become consensus, that now anything almost that's different from the US establishment is going to be different in a good way, which is kind of what Amjad is saying, right? But I just wanted to kind of point that out, because there's times and places where the current system actually works pretty well, and the divergence from it is actually net bad, arguably, or many divergences are net bad. It's like, for example, when I think about it, when you've got code that works, if you introduce random edits, they're innovations, but they're often bad innovations. It's like actually hard to improve upon something that's pretty good. This is not disagreeing with anything Amjad is saying. I agree with him. I'm just adding a little bit of color that at this time and place, divergence probably has more of a payoff than it has had before on both capitalistic and ideological dimensions. Let me
you're also in the midst of massive change, and then we'll reach another sort of Pareto equilibrium. But the sort of Pareto positive jump is obvious now. It's really obvious.
Yes.
The Pareto positive jump, right? And like, if you don't take it, you're just like, honestly, you're like not thinking. And
that's right.
And eventually enough people will take it, and then it stops being that profitable. But right now it's super profitable.
It's funny, actually, because we have just been through about 20 years where the internet has reinvented music, movies, books, television, taxis, hotels, cars, rockets, ads, much of society itself, right? In terms of social networks, right? Phones, blah, blah, right? And yet there's a lot of people who think that the current political institutions or other institutions just need to be reformed, need some edits around the sides or whatever. Where to me, it's sort of clear. Have you ever done a thing with like a rope where you kind of go like this, and again, you've got a wave on it, and that wave is traveling, and that's going to go whoop up like that, and it's going to hit all those institutions and totally disrupt them. I mean, currencies and contracts are just the beginning of it. I mean, the most obvious way of thinking about that is the way the U.S. government, which runs a giant portion of the world still, not just the U.S., how does it write code? Okay, it is 400 people, 535 if you include, Congress and Senate or whatever, adversarially programming with lobbyists putting in things, 800 pages of code that is pushed to production on 300 million people with no testing, no rollback, right? Certainly no like focus groups or stuff like that. And no one even knows what's in the bill. Everybody just hits deploy on it, right? Like it's obvious and it's on paper and nobody knows what the words actually mean because you haven't written unit tests to capture the meaning of it. And huge parts of it are adversarial where people are putting in like pork for their local district. This is obviously bad. And it's as obviously bad as, you know, how we think about the Catholic Church running affairs in Europe for, once the industrial age started. Like that entire model of like church and monarchs and so on doing it became outmoded once the industrial age started. So the information age has obviously obsolesced these paper laws and these ancient procedures. I mean, imagine like 4 years to gain data and iterate on something when things like turn around in like a day or a week. And the system is obviously straining to deal with this stuff, right? So it's clearly going to get disrupted. So clearly the system that we have is not going to be the system that we will have in 10 or 20 years. And so, yeah, diverge from consensus. This is the time. Also, by the way, Indians in particular, given that we're on an India call or India talk, Indians are the largest population of English speakers who have very little investment in the current global system. India is not part of the UN. The Indian rupee is not part of the SDR. Indians are not enmeshed in every Indians are not enmeshed in every major institution. The sort of advanced scouts, the diaspora, yes, have done actually fairly well and are in tech obviously, but also in politics and media and other things. But there's tens of millions, hundreds of millions of more people who are underpriced relative to their potential. And so, of course, these institutions are going to get disrupted. It's like this coiled spring that is now going to, explode upon the world. And Replit is enabling that, among other things,
This was amazing. Balaji, Amjad, thank you so much for joining us. By the way, guys, if you haven't heard of Replit yet, you guys must check it out. UPI is coming. A whole lot more is coming to India. Hopefully, Amjad will be doing a lot more stuff in India together. And all the best to you. All the best to the Replit India team. Balaji, thank you as always. We need to do an episode just on AI. I'm super curious. That was fascinating. Thank you for joining us again.
Sure. My pleasure.
Thanks, everybody. Okay.